Good evening, I'm Bret Baier. Welcome to a special edition of Special Report. We will focus on a single issue over the next hour, one that affects every American and is sure to be a major factor in next year's presidential election: Medicare. We will talk with each party's Medicare point man in the House and the president's budget director. First, some background on why the Medicare program is in trouble and why finding a solution has been so elusive. Here is Chief Washington correspondent Jim Angle.
Morning, how are you?
Very good. There's one inescapable fact about Medicare. It's promised tens of trillions in benefits it cannot pay for.
Unsustainable is the word, so we have to figure out how we're going to slow the growth.
Both President Obama and Congressman Paul Ryan would do that, but in very different ways. The president cut Medicare by some $500 billion in the new health care law.
The reductions in spending that we saw in the Affordable Care Act are a slowdown in growth in payments to providers.
That theoretically lowers costs, but even supporters acknowledge some risk in paying less.
They can only diverge so much without endangering access for beneficiaries or getting providers to say to private insurers, you have to make up the difference.
Which would increase costs for everyone else and make it hard for seniors to get care.
If you ratchet down the payments to doctors and hospitals too much, you will damage the care.
That means that the providers are going to drop out of the program.
The administration assumes such problems can be avoided by providers increasing efficiency at the same rate as manufacturing.
Trouble is, we've been trying to do all those things for a long time, and it's not slowing down spending right now.
Though the president doesn't tout it, he also plans to cut Medicare even more every year by setting a cap on future spending.
If spending exceeds that target, then he relies on experts to make changes in payments.
An independent payments advisory board with the power to reduce reimbursements even more, which critics say would lead to rationing.
Ryan's approach is entirely different. It says we need to try to inject into the Medicare the same dynamics that are producing such great things in the rest of the American economy.
By having private insurance companies compete for the business of seniors, the government would set minimum coverage and pay a fixed amount in premiums for seniors, a notion called premium support.
Well, premium support is not just a Ryan idea or a Republican idea. It has had bipartisan support.
Rivlin, Bill Clinton's budget director, has her own premium support plan, but would keep traditional Medicare as an option. The Congressional Budget Office says under the Ryan plan, seniors would have to pay $6,400 out of pocket, but supporters note Ryan would give the poor a $7,800 allowance to cover those costs.
So higher income and more well-to-do people would pay even more.
Though the premium support would rise every year with inflation, critics say it wouldn't be enough.
Over time, more and more of the responsibility for paying for Medicare benefits would come out of beneficiaries' hides.
But supporters say competition will accomplish more savings than the Obama approach.
Competition in a marketplace can actually deliver more for less if we let it work.
Both approaches have risks, but analysts say one thing is clear: the status quo is not an option. In Washington, Jim Angle, Fox News.
One lawmaker trying to address the Medicare problem is House Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan. His plan has been a rallying point for Republicans and a lightning rod for Democrats. Welcome.
Thanks. Good to be with you again.
Well, you heard the setup there. Let's talk about your plan and lay it out for us in simple terms for people to understand at home.
I think it was a pretty good setup, actually. Here's what we're thinking when we're doing this budget. Number one, people who are already retired, they've already organized their lives around Medicare. People who are about 10 years away from retirement, they're preparing their lives around the Medicare system as it's currently designed. So what we say, don't make changes to the Medicare program for anybody above the age of 55. Government made them this promise. Let's try and keep that promise. And we believe we can keep that promise, cash flow that promise, if we reform it for the younger generation, those of us below 54. The way in which we propose to reform it for the younger generation, like Alice Rivlin described, called premium support, an idea with bipartisan support in the past. It was the idea recommended by Bill Clinton's bipartisan commission to save Medicare. You have a list of guaranteed coverage options offered to you by Medicare. You pick the plan you want. just like the prescription drug benefit plan, just like Part D, just like Medigap insurance works, and then Medicare subsidizes your plan. The subsidy grows, but here's the thing. We say, since only so much money can go around, don't subsidize wealthy people as much as everybody else and give lower income people even more money. We believe the best way to get at the root cause of health inflation is through choice and competition. The patient and the doctor are the ones who make the decisions, not some board of bureaucrats. The president's plan is different. His plan doesn't save Medicare. It still goes bankrupt in 2021, according to CBO, 2024, according to the actuaries. And what he does also is he takes $500 billion from Medicare to spend on Obamacare. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from people who say, stop raiding Social Security. Well, Obamacare starts raiding Medicare. We stop the raid, but then they also put this board in charge of Medicare's prices. 15 unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. They don't have to go through Congress's approval process. They just do it. And what the trustees at Medicare are telling us is it's going to cause more and more providers just to drop Medicare patients. 15% by the end of the decade, 40% after that. They're saying we'll just stop seeing Medicare patients. So we think Obamacare actually does more damage to current seniors. We repeal the rate of the program, we repeal this rationing board, keep the program intact for current seniors, and we can do that if we reform it for the next generation, and we want to use ideas that have worked. The prescription drug benefit, which works just like what we're talking about for those 54 and below crowd, came in 41% below cost projections because it harnessed the power of choice and competition. Let's make all those providers out there compete against each other for our business, for our healthcare needs. That puts us in charge, not 15 bureaucrats, and that helps us get more value for our money.
You brought some graphs with you explaining the situation. Tell us about those.
Well, first of all, if you pull this up, look at our current path. This is the debt path we are on. We literally are going to have a massive debt crisis in this country, which will pull down our economy. What is the big driver of the debt? That's the second chart. The big driver of our debt are our entitlement programs, namely Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. That's the second chart. Now, what these numbers tell you is that our healthcare entitlement programs, which were created in the 60s, are the biggest drivers of our future debt. When these programs were created, men lived into their 60s, women lived into their 70s. Now men are living into their 70s, women are living in their 80s and 90s. What's more, we got 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day, and healthcare costs are growing a lot faster than the economy. Those things combined are giving us a huge problem with respect to our future debt. If we have a debt crisis, then Medicare gets cut indiscriminately, the economy goes down, we will have to do European-like austerity, meaning current cuts to current seniors, tax increases that slows down our economy. That's what Europe is doing. The path to prosperity, our budget, the whole idea of it is to preempt that. Preserve these benefits for those in near retirement and prevent a debt crisis from happening in this country, so we're not doing the painful thing of cutting indiscriminately to people with no time to prepare. It's really get this under control while we have time and can do it on our terms, or keep kicking the can down the road, play politics, demagogue, and ignore this problem. And then when it really gets bad, then you got to cut everybody, and that's what we want to avoid.
It's a market-based solution, yours. Now, critics would say you're simply replacing the inefficiency of government-run systems with a heartlessness of a profit-driven one. How do you respond to that?
Monopolies don't work, whether it's a private sector insurance monopoly or a government monopoly. What the plan that they're talking about, the president's plan, is to have a government monopoly run this program and then have 15 bureaucrats that he appoints make the decisions. We don't want a government bureaucrat or a health insurance bureaucrat running our health care. We believe choice and competition where you have a powerful consumer. More money to the people who need it, less money to people who don't need it, but more importantly, let the senior citizen fire their health care provider or their health care plan if they don't like it, and then hire a new one. That has worked very, very well in the prescription drug benefit. It's worked where we've tried this. We need to do this in this program because that helps us stretch our health care dollar further. But more importantly, I don't think we should have some distant bureaucrat involved in very special decisions on how we get our health care in our old age. That's something we, as individuals and family members, should make, and the government should subsidize the middle and lower income people more than higher income people. And doing it the way we say it, we think will lower healthcare inflation, stretch our dollar farther, and give help more to the people who need it the most and less to the people who need it less.
The biggest criticism is on the money, saying that citing a CBO statistic that is $6,400 it falls short of, and that individuals would bear the burden, $6,400. You say that low-income folks would get supplemented by $7,800, right?
That's right.
Now, the budget director, Jack Lew, says that that subsidy ends at $16,000 a year, so that it's essentially phased out. Is there a phase out?
It's a phase out for the poverty level. So it's people who are under the poverty level get the extra subsidy, but also people who are getting sicker get a higher subsidy no matter how much they make. But more to the point, that $6,400 number is premised upon the idea that competition never works. It's premised on the idea that Medicare will keep growing at the rates it's going, and nobody's suggesting it will. The whole premise of that figure is on a faulty premise that Medicare can keep growing at these unsustainable rates, which leads us to a debt crisis. Even President Obama, with his new law that caps Medicare's payments, rejects the status quo by which this is measured against. That $6,400 number is a myth. It's not going to happen, and even President Obama's budget acknowledges that.
But you understand it's a powerful point
Absolutely.
On the stump, and that people say, if I have to put $6,400 out of my pocket, I don't have it.
This, by the way, doesn't apply to anybody above the age of 55.
Right.
And it applies to people in the year 2030 and 2050 and beyond after that. So if we haven't fixed this problem by the year 2030 or 2050, that's the least of our concerns.
What are the consequences of not dealing with this issue before the election? The economic consequences.
What the actuaries tell us is every year we fail to address this crisis, we go about $10 trillion deeper in the hole on how many unfunded promises government is making to people. For Medicare itself, it's in the neighborhood of $1 to $2 trillion where we go deeper in the hole every year we fail to fix the problem. What that means is when we actually get around to fixing the Medicare problem, the solutions are that much more painful. They're that much more severe, and people have that much less lead time to prepare for a new program. And we are less likely to be able to prevent changes from occurring to people 55 and above. That's what it means, kicking the can down the road. We think the smart, gradual, sensible thing to do is keep the promise that government made to people who are already retired or people who are about to retire. But to do that, you and I, our generation, have got to have a different system that's solvent and secure. So we do that. We save Medicare, preserve the current benefit, we end the raid, and stop the rationing.
Congressman, we'll have you back for the head-to-head debate in just a few minutes.
Look forward to it.
Thank you. Up next, Chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and Ranking Member of the Budget Committee. Congressman, thanks for being here.
It's great to be with you, Bret.
You have the floor, sir.
Well, thank you, and it's great to be here with you to discuss the future of Medicare, which I think, as we know, provides health and income security to millions of American seniors. And the Medicare debate, of course, is taking part in the context of a larger debate over the budget, about our priorities and values. So I want to make it clear at the beginning that we believe we have to reduce the deficit in a steady and predictable way. The question is, how do we do it? And to govern is to choose. And we think the choices made in the Republican budget on Medicare and other points are wrong for America, and we think we have a better alternative. So I want to talk to you about both those things. First, with respect to the choices in the Republican budget. They choose to end the Medicare guarantee, but they don't get rid of the big subsidies for oil companies and other corporations that exploit loopholes in our tax code, and many of whom pay absolutely no income tax. And with respect to Medicare, they do two things. One, they immediately increase the exposure of seniors to rising prescription drug costs. Why? Because they eliminate our effort to close the prescription drug donut hole. That happens right away. Second, they end the Medicare guarantee, and they force seniors into the private insurance market, where seniors will face rapidly rising health care costs with a lot less support from the government. It's a great deal for the insurance industry. It'll be a bonanza for them, but it's a lousy deal for America's seniors. And here's why. The costs in the private insurance market on a per capita basis have been rising faster than the costs in Medicare. That's according to the most recent Medicare Trustees report, and it's confirmed by the CMS Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services. And what this chart shows is that in the private insurance market, the per capita costs each year between 2002 and 2009 have been going up at 6.7%, whereas in Medicare it's 4.6%. And we all know that. People have been in the private market buying private health insurance because between the year 2000 and 2010 we saw premiums more than double as insurance company profits for the top 5 more than quadrupled. And that is a very bad place to be putting seniors, especially when at the same time you're going to give them a relatively declining value. Whether you call it voucher, premium support, I don't care. The reality is it doesn't begin to keep pace with the rising costs. And that's what the nonpartisan CBO indicated. And what they showed was that in the year 2020, under the Republican budget, because of the higher costs in the private market and less support from Medicare, seniors will pay an additional $6,350. And it gets worse and worse as time goes on because the costs keep going up and the relative support from Medicare through the voucher premium support goes down. So here's what happens in the year 2030. And in that year, again, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, seniors will pay over $11,000 more. Now, keep in mind that right now, the median income for a Medicare beneficiary is under $21,000. So you're asking them to either eat these higher costs or they're going to have to take a much lower benefit package without the health protections. This, at the same time, the budget said we're going to cut the top income tax rate for millionaires by 30%. So that's why Newt Gingrich got it right the first time when he said this was a radical plan and right-wing social engineering, and that's why there's a better way forward, which is to continue to implement the reforms we began in the Affordable Care Act, and I'd be happy to discuss those with you. I can continue the presentation now.
Well, sure, go ahead, because that's the question that most Republicans have when they hear all of the presentations and the attacks on the Republican plan, is what specifically is the Democratic plan to deal with something that even a Democrat economist, Alice Rivlin, says is unsustainable.
Well, there's no doubt. We have a challenge in Medicare going forward, and that's why in the Affordable Care Act, the Reform Act that we passed last year, we began to put in place mechanisms to, first of all, reduce the cost of health care throughout the system, because Medicare is a player in that larger system. We want to reduce the costs. We also made some reforms in Medicare. For example, we ended the overpayments to the private plans, the Medicare Advantage plans. There are private plans in Medicare. About 25% of Medicare beneficiaries choose them, but they have actually not been more cost effective. We had to eliminate the subsidy. There are additional things we need to do. For example, when the prescription drug bill was passed, there's no reason they wrote right into law that the government could not negotiate drug prices like the Veterans Administration did. A lot of lobbyists in the pharmaceutical industry pushed for that, but there's no reason. Let me just say this. This is a statement from the Medicare Trustees Report, the most recent. Very clear. The financial outlook for the Medicare program is substantially improved as a result of the changes in the Affordable Care Act. And if you look at this chart prepared by the trustees, they show that as a result of the Affordable Care Act and the changes, if implemented fully, will significantly bend the cost curve. So that act
So stay with what you have.
Sure.
Is what it is.
No, not
or
not
adjust it.
No, what you have in the Affordable Care Act is a series of steps that will be taken over a period of time that are just beginning. We're reading in the papers now about accountable care organizations. The idea is to modernize the Medicare system, to incentivize quality of care over quantity of care, to make sure you get value, not volume, and drive down the costs. On top of that, as I indicated, there are things you can do to strengthen the Medicare program's bargaining position with the pharmaceutical industry. Before 2005, for people on Medicaid, we paid lower drug prices. When they became what we call dual eligible, Medicaid and Medicare, we ended up paying more. There's no reason to do that. That saves right there tens of billions of dollars. Better coordination of care. So there are lots of things that are going to be done as part of the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, but also additional things that we can do to bring down costs.
Congressman, stay around if you would for the head-to-head debate. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will find out what White House Budget Director Jack Lew thinks of the possible solutions when our special report on Medicare returns. Welcome back to this special edition of Special Report on the issue of Medicare. Joining us now, the head of the Office of Management and Budget, the Obama administration's Budget Director, Jack Lew. Thanks for being here.
Good to be with you, Bret.
Baby boomers are retiring at a rate of 10,000 a day for the next 19 years. What is the administration's plan to deal with Medicare?
Well, I think it's important to go back as well as forward. In the Affordable Care Act, for example, there were more changes made, savings made, extending the life of the Medicare Trust Fund than people generally appreciate. So we've done quite a lot already. In the budgets that the President has proposed since then, he has additional savings of hundreds of billions of dollars in Medicare and Medicaid health care spending. So he's done quite a lot, and he knows that we need to do more.
But you agree with people like Alice Rivlin who say Medicare itself is unsustainable.
Well, obviously there is a long-term Medicare financing problem. Just a few weeks ago, the Medicare trustees put out a report and said that the trust fund will be fully funded through 2024. It would be nice to have that be longer. So we have a little bit of time. We do have a challenge, but it's not that we fall off of a cliff. Yeah, and I think one of the things that we have tried to do as we look at healthcare is set up a system where it can change over time. It's the Affordable Care Act isn't carved in stone. There are aspects of it where, as we learn more, we'll be evolving.
But the president would cap spending every year eventually. How does that work? How can you arbitrarily pick a growth rate and say that's it without affecting care in some way?
All of the plans that have scorable savings do something that caps expenses. In the case of the president's plan, it says that here are projections. They grow at what we think is a reasonable rate, and if that fails, we're going to have a mechanism in place to constrain costs on the provider side. The
administration does that by a board, the Independent Payments Advisory Board, right?
That is one of the aspects of the Affordable Care Act, yes.
As opposed to the Republicans' plan that is strictly market-driven to drive down and to make sure that it's efficient, you have this board. And critics would say that it's trusting a bureaucracy of an unelected and unaccountable board, that if costs go up, that they automatically are cutting down to a certain level and possibly scaling back significantly.
First, it makes recommendations, and Congress gets the final word. So it in no way circumvents the normal process. Secondly, it specifically prohibits rationing of any kind. So it's an attempt to bring the best data, the best analysis, the best advice into the system and bring it up for review by political decision makers in a way where we can perhaps discipline a system that's not always disciplined about making these choices.
So you don't think the market could do that as opposed to the Republican plan?
We do have market features built into the Affordable Care Act. Obviously the idea of healthcare exchanges has an element of competition in it. I think that the question of kind of healthcare generally, we do believe in competition. That's why the Affordable Care Act is so important in terms of being the first time in a generation we've taken a step to put in place an approach that would deal across the economy with rising healthcare costs. To pull Medicare out and to put the burden on beneficiaries is not an approach that we think is the right approach. We totally agree that healthcare costs are an issue and we have to deal with them. It's a question of how to best get our hands around that and what's the most fair way to do it.
Director Lew, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Please stay with us. After the break, this special edition of Special Report on the issue of Medicare continues. For a discussion. Gentlemen, thank you for sticking around. Congressman Ryan, you listened to Congressman VanHollan in his presentation. Thoughts? You could address each other?
I was impressed with how many charts he could fit into 4 minutes. That was really pretty impressive, Chris. I've got to learn from you on that. Yeah, that's right. First of all, CBO is telling us Medicare is going bankrupt in 2021. So the status quo is not an option. The status quo is bankruptcy, and we've got to preserve and prevent that. One thing about Medicare costs going up slower than private sector costs, the reason is Medicare underpays providers. According to the CMS, the actuaries tell us they're paying providers about 66 cents on the dollar under the Affordable Care Act. They'll be paying providers as low as 33 cents on the dollar at the end of the day. And that means providers are going to just stop taking Medicare patients. So yes, government can make it look like it's cheaper if it just underpays providers and pays them less than the cost of providing the care. And what happens is providers overcharge the private payers to make up for the difference, and that's a system that's not sustainable.
Well, let me stop there. What about that, Congressman VanHollan? The administration really does reduce Medicare spending by reducing reimbursements to providers. And if, as Congressman Ryan says, wouldn't that mean that seniors eventually would have trouble getting doctors or finding?
Well, first let me respond to the first point he made, which is that Medicare is going, quote, bankrupt. If you look at the trustees' report, that's not in there at all. What it does have is with respect to Part D, which is the hospital part, that beginning in 2024, and it may be accelerated, that we're going to fall short in terms of the premiums. Part A for hospitals. In fact, it will be about 90% funded on payroll taxes, so you will have a gap that we have to fill. Remember that a big chunk of Medicare is funded through general revenue. In fact, about 50% of it is now. So the suggestion that a shortfall in Part A is somehow bankrupting the program is just false. And
as Jack Lew said, it's not going to fall off a cliff.
It's not going to fall off a cliff. So then the question is, where do we go? And we know that in the private insurance market, we've seen rising costs, in fact, rising faster per beneficiary than in Medicare. So why in the world would we want to turn over seniors to that particular system? We've enacted a lot of reforms, and unfortunately, when the Republicans voted against the Affordable Care Act the first day, they actually would have accelerated the problem, according to CBO, in terms of because the CBO indicated and the trustees, that act actually improved the solvency of the system.
That point is premised upon the idea that they're taking $500 billion from Medicare to pay for the president's new health care law. You can't count the same dollar twice. And the actuaries at Medicare actually put an appendix to the report, I've never seen this before, where they said you can't count $1 in Medicare and then $1 in Obamacare. It's one or the other. So it's either funding Obamacare or it's extending the solvency of Medicare. But back to my original point, yes, if government underpays healthcare providers, it can look a lot cheaper. Here's the problem. For every Medicare patient walking in the door and a provider loses money every time one of those people walk in the door, how likely is that hospital or doctor to continue seeing those patients? And what Medicare is telling us, Medicare itself is saying more and more providers are just going to stop taking Medicare. That's an unsustainable situation we got to deal with.
Here's the problem with Paul's argument. We do have two experiments within Medicare with respect to the private market. One is the Medicare Advantage plan. And in fact, they had to be over-subsidized. The reason we reduced the spending to Medicare Advantage is because they were being subsidized at about 114% of the fee-for-service Medicare program. That was the private plan. 25%.
I would actually agree.
25% of Medicare beneficiaries choose that. Now, Part D prescription drug program, which, by the way, was enacted without paying for it, and is going to be a big liability we have to deal with. Although is funded with general revenue.
One thing, every time that's said, there was a Democratic plan back there that cost more.
And it was also not funded. But the point is here, we're talking about this without talking about all the other aspects of the budget. For example, the revenue piece, trying to shut down on some of these corporate loopholes, because what their budget says is let's squeeze Medicare beneficiaries rather than closing those loopholes and using those revenues.
Those are two of his charts where it dealt with the out-of-pocket.
We believe choice and competition, where it's worked everywhere else in the American economy, where it's worked well when applied in healthcare, actually helps people stretch their healthcare dollar farther than a government monopoly with a government board of bureaucrats making the decisions, inflicting price controls, which will deny access of care. The other thing is he's right. There's a lot of general revenue money going into Medicare. And the law says if more than 45% of the program is funded with general revenue money 2 years in a row, the president has to submit a plan to Congress to make it solvent. That has happened. The president hasn't submitted a plan. Nobody has submitted a plan. You're right. To govern is to choose. The Senate has chosen not to produce a budget. To his credit, he did produce a budget. It didn't deal with Medicare. The president hasn't produced a budget to fix this problem. House Republicans have. Ours does save Medicare and prevent it from going bankrupt. He clearly may not like the way in which we do it, But at least we're saving the system, preserving the program, and not changing benefits for current seniors. And the other last point I would simply make is the CBO is telling us that in 2037 the entire economy crashes because of debt. Medicare is making promises to people that it doesn't have money for to the tune of about $30 trillion.
To pass a prescription drug bill, as they did, that relies on general revenue, and then to introduce a budget that says we're not going to ask the folks, you know, at the very top to go back to the same tax rates that they were under the Clinton administration when the economy was roaring, and to squeeze Medicare beneficiaries instead is a clear choice. Now, Paul keeps talking about the prescription, the Part D.
That's a non sequitur, I would
No, it's not, because revenue is necessary to support the program.
We're saying take away people's tax shelters at the higher level in order to lower rates and tax them at, for every dollar in a tax shelter, it's taxed at zero. Take away the tax shelter and then you can tax it at a lower rate. That's better for the economy.
No, but the missing piece in yours is revenue, which is why the bipartisan commission said that the Republican plan was not balanced.
They
there's no
want us
revenue
to raise taxes. We don't.
But let me point out.
One more chart.
Because this goes to the question on the Part D, which is the prescription drug program, and this is from the trustees report, and what they say is the average annual increases in Part D beneficiary costs are expected to be greater than for the hospital insurance or the other Part B between the years 2011 and 2020. So the point here is that the prescription drug bill, which is held up as a model for this competition, in fact, the per beneficiary costs are going to be higher.
These are the same people that were off by 41% on their estimates because they don't think competition works. The other thing is the CBO has told us, as a result of Obamacare, prescription drug costs are going to go up, not down.
But these are the guys that you've been quoting, Paul, the trustees.
Well,
and they also pointed out in their previous reports that the primary reason that the Part D program, prescription drug program, came under was because prescription drug prices throughout the healthcare system were going down at the same time.
Competition.
No. This is going down at the same time throughout the entire system.
Ryan, I want to focus on that out-of-pocket for beneficiaries. You're saying they wouldn't be paying out of the pocket.
So the whole notion of this measurement of out-of-pocket, it assumes that we're going to have the status quo. Look, if the status quo was fine, we wouldn't have to even have this conversation. Status quo is the country's going bankrupt and this program's going bankrupt. This program is making promises that nobody is suggesting can be met. This is why President Obama caps the growth of the program itself. So to measure any reform plan against the status quo that is over $30 trillion in the hole is sort of fanciful. The other point is, I'd say, we give more money to lower-income people to cover their out-of-pocket expenses. And yes, we do believe that choice and competition, having providers compete against each other for our business, is better and will work. And these analyses assume no competition makes any difference at all.
It's not going bankrupt unless you starve it of revenues. And that's why the choices in the budget are so important. And the choice they make, well, no, that's not, because 50% of Medicare is funded through general revenue. So if you provide tax breaks to the folks
tax reform. We're not talking about cutting tax revenues.
But the bipartisan fiscal commission who looked at this,
they want tax increases.
Well, they said we need revenue increases. Absolutely, by closing loopholes, and also asking the folks.
You can't say that because we're against tax increases means we're cutting taxes.
You are asking Medicare beneficiaries to take less at the same time you're saying to the folks at the very top, we're going to keep your tax breaks in place.
We could do 2 hours, I think. 10 seconds left. I know you do this all the time. 10 seconds. Will this get dealt with before the election?
Well, the fundamental question on Medicare, the proposal they put forward is a non-starter, and so that's certainly not going anywhere.
And Obamacare is a non-starter for us. So we just have different opinions on health care. We don't think we should ration the program. We don't think we should raid the program. We think we should preserve it for current seniors and then save it for the next generation. And we have a different opinion on how to
really interesting on this point. Their proposal for Medicare is Obamacare, which they disparage every day. It is what they propose.
I would not agree with that.
Well, it is. It's a premium support program, except you don't provide the safeguards, actually, for seniors.
We could do a lot more.
That's what it is.
Thank you very much for your time, both of you. Next up, reaction to what we've heard, a special Medicare edition of the Fox All-Stars when we return. You've heard the arguments. Now let's get some analysis. A special edition of the Fox All-Stars joins me now. Former Congressional Budget Office Director Doug Holtz-Egan, Nina Easton, columnist for Fortune magazine, and Henry Aaron, noted healthcare expert from the Brookings Institution. Thanks for being here. Nina, let's start with you. You saw the debate, the presentations. Your thoughts?
Well, I think there's pain for people all around. I think what you're seeing from the Republican plan is the potential of pain in out-of-pocket health care costs. What are those going to be? Paul Ryan says a $6,300 figure is not right. Well, what is it going to look like? But there's pain on the Democratic side too. The pain is a potential of rationing. There is whether you are taking money away from providers and they're opting out of the system, or you have this board that is making those kinds of decisions. There's the possibility of rationing in the system. So either one holds out that possibility. My issue, though, I think the long-term solution has to control costs, and you have to get into a program that controls costs. And in fairness to Paul Ryan, the Congressional Budget Office shows that his plan will substantially cut health care spending costs. I mean, that's out there. And then there are Democrats like Alice Rivlin who will inject more market forces into a plan. She doesn't go as far as Paul Ryan, but she wants to inject market forces and to have beneficiaries take more personal responsibility for their medical care, so the doctors aren't giving out tests over and over and over again. And I think you do have to go that route to get to the root of the problem.
Doug, is there a coming together at all? It seems like there's such a huge chasm between Republicans and Democrats on this issue.
I think the biggest chasm that you see is an urgency chasm. Republicans, Paul Ryan, I think, says very clearly the status quo is a danger to seniors themselves because this program is broken and bleeding red ink and not delivering great medical care to boot. It's a danger to the overall budgetary situation, and as a result, since we are sailing toward a fiscal crisis, it's a danger to every job in America. So the urgency with which we must move this toward a more sustainable path is real palpable in the Republican presentations. You saw OMB Director Jack Lew say, we have a lot of time. We put some things in the Affordable Care Act, which really look a lot like things that have tried and failed before with more experts. And then they start talking about a different subject, oil companies or higher taxes. And I think that you really do have to recognize that status quo is a danger to our country.
How does that play politically, Henry? I mean, obviously it's a lot of people, it hits home.
Medicare hits home because it's one of the most popular programs in the United States. I think the view that the Ryan plan actually reduces costs reflects a deep misunderstanding of the plan. In fact, it would reduce budget costs to the federal government. But what the problem is for the United States in the case of health care is that all our health care costs are going up. And the Ryan plan, according to the estimates of the Congressional Budget Office, would substantially raise the total cost of services for people covered by Medicare.
Now, it's important to point out that the CBO is kind of like a calculator. What you put in,
yes,
you get it.
Well, they're the arbiter. They're a nonpartisan group. They do straight analysis. Doug was the head of that organization and much admired during his tenure as director of Congressional Budget Office. You can argue that one way or you can argue the other, but basically the CBO is our scorekeeper. And the calculations they've come up with is that it raises costs, it doesn't lower them. Furthermore, Doug kind of dismisses the Affordable Care Act, but the fact of the matter is the Affordable Care Act contains virtually every idea for cost control that any analyst has come up with, including health insurance exchanges, limiting the tax advantages for employer-sponsored insurance, and a number of other provisions.
Doug, there have been criticisms, though, about whether that all is delivered in all the cost-cutting and savings that are said to be in that plan.
Well, I think there are two criticisms. The first is that even the CBO didn't see this bending the cost curve, and so we've done this, and it doesn't bend the cost curve. We still have a big problem. And the second is that to the extent there are some identifiable savings, they're funneled off into yet a new health spending program. So the net problem isn't reduced a bit by the Affordable Care Act. That, I think, becomes a real issue.
Some final thoughts with the panel after a short timeout. We're back with our special panel for a look into the crystal ball on this issue. Nina.
Well, you can't take the crystal ball out of the 2012 election, first of all. I think this is going to be very much front and center in the election. In the Republican primary, there is going to be a demand by voters that each of the candidates come up with something if they don't support the Ryan plan. So I think it's going to be alive and well inside the Republican primaries. And I think the Democrats will use it to beat Republicans over the head, which they've done quite successfully so far.
Henry.
I agree with Nina on the importance in the election. I want to frame what I think is at stake. Today, all Medicare beneficiaries have a choice of more than 20 private plans like those that would be available under the Ryan plan. 75% of them take traditional Medicare. The Ryan plan would take that option away from them. I think that's going to be a critical issue in the election.
Doug.
This is the central element of the most important issue for the future of the country, and the issue will be whether the election will provide the education that says the benefit you've been promised, the budget that's ongoing, and the economy that you've dreamed of are all unrealistic unless we change direction. And Republicans have said these are our plans. They're waiting for Democrats to come up with comparable plans to change the course of our future.
Panel, thank you very much. We look forward to other issues to go through like this one. Medicare, it's crucial for tens of millions of Americans. It's also a political football when you talk about how to pay for it over the long term. Eventually, both sides agree something must be done. The decisions on what to do next ultimately rest with you. We hope we've been able to shed some light today. We will continue to provide information and analysis on this and other crucial topics right here on Fox News Channel. Fair and balanced, as always. Now we invite you to stay right here as Special Report continues after a short break.